Hello, welcome to Violin Tutorial 2, where I'll be going over how to specify the scoring parameters and attributes. I'm going to be again working in the IPy notebook, and if you want to know more about that, you'll have to go back to Tutorial 1. And if you remember from Tutorial 1, we have this cell here where we define the scoring dictionaries for the kind and match scores. And you can change these values around depending on your modeling goals. For example, if you wanted to do a depth first extension, you would change the match scores like so, and similarly adjust the kind score values. We don't want to deal with hanging extensions or full extensions anymore. We want to put more importance on the internal and specifications, and we want to care a little bit more about contradictions, making sure that everything in our model agrees with the literature. So you could do that, but what I actually want to highlight in this video is what we can do with these sub-classification categories. So I'm going to undo all of those changes I just made. And I'm going to leave these match values at default and define the kind values in the following way so that each sub-classification category has its own distinct value. And in this case, I care a little bit less about the total score and more about using these subclassification categories. So I'm defining these values more on making them distinct than I am caring about how these affect the total score. I'm using the same input files as in tutorial 1, so the evidence score columns will stay the same. But something else I want to draw your attention to is this attributes variable here. Some attributes Violin compares by default, like the interaction sign, the interaction direction, the regulator and regulated types. But sometimes we have additional attributes we want to compare between the reading and the model. So for this reading set, you can see that I'm comparing the location ID. I want to see if these interactions are occurring at the same cellular location as those in the model. If I wanted to also compare the cell line, I would add it to the attribute list. So, but for this tutorial, I'm going to stick just with the location ID. And once you've set your scoring parameters, you run through Violin as usual. And you'll see the output files appear here on the left. And now I'm going to run the visualization function on the total output, and we'll get something interesting. Okay. So in addition to the summary I showed you in tutorial 1, you'll get this detailed breakdown of the subclassifications, showing how many LEEs are classified for each subclassification for the corroborations, extensions, contradictions, and flagged. And I can also go back and change the filter parameter. Say I only want LEEs with an evidence score greater than, let's say 3, because this is a relatively small reading set. Yep, and then it gets mad because we end up with no LEEs classified with flagged that also have a evidence score higher than 3, and we see how these little pie charts change. We end up with fewer of every type of LEE, and the distribution changes as well. We still have a majority of extensions, fewer corroborations, and even fewer contradictions. So that's what you can do, changing the parameters around with Violin. You could change around how Violin treats different classifications of LEEs. You can change how you filter your output so you get kind of a more detailed idea of how to use it. You could say, okay, I only want to use something with such a higher evidence score, or I only want to use, let's change this again, say I only want to use the top 50% scored. And let's see what that visualization looks like. Again, still fewer LEEs in total. And that can help you make decisions versus having to go through the spreadsheets manually. So that is violin tutorial 2, specifying the score and attributes, and I hope to see you for the next tutorial.